Part of my internship assignment was to complete a reflection log of my experience as a technology leader at my school. Here I have compiled all of my notes for each of the tech tools that I created professional development on, as well as my one-on-one experience and the initial survey. I found this reflection log to be useful because I was able to look back at how each experience was different and how I can improve my professional development for future use. After my presentation on Front Row, my colleagues expressed that they found it helpful that this information could be accessed through our Google Shared Docs. I found that some of my colleagues were very excited to use Front Row and quickly set it up and used it in their classrooms. I found that others stated they were excited, but it took them a long time to create an account. This was due to many colleagues wanting one-on-one support with setting up their classroom account. Therefore, I found that the handout was useless as many did not refer back to it. Implementation also took some of my colleagues some time. I think this may be due to the many changes they were going through as a school, and this was one extra tool they had to learn about. As time went on, my colleagues expressed how much their students enjoyed Front Row and looked forward to playing it on a daily basis. I was also able to share my presentation and handout with the kindergarten resource teacher because she was intrigued after seeing my students at the computer lab. As I explained more about it, she became interested and wanted to share it with her team. I mentioned that I could explain how to use it and explain the benefits of Front Row to her team if she would like. She explained that this was something we could accomplish next year. After my Screencastify presentation, my colleagues were very excited to see my model of the screencast I created during my ET 605 course. After my model, my colleagues became very interested in learning more about this tech tool. At the end of my presentation, they asked if I could share my screencast with them. They were all very excited to share it with parents because I mentioned that I used it to show my parents how to sign up for parent-teacher conferences. My colleagues were excited about all the lessons they could record with Screencastify. They were so excited they listed several ideas for lessons we could record and how students could use it to record their voices over a story they had written, to explain their answer, and much more. My colleagues were also very motivated because it is user-friendly. Since every teacher has a Chromebook, all they had to do was download the application. Due to having only one Chromebook in our classrooms, this makes students using the application very limited. One challenge that my colleagues did mention was the inability to record our desktops. Due to this concern, I spoke to our media specialist and she recommended that I send an email to our IT director and ask her to install it onto each of our computers. I then relayed the information back to my colleagues and they stated that they would prefer to simply use it on the Chromebooks. After my presentation on Symbaloo, my colleagues stated they were very excited to hear about this tool. They liked the idea that it was accessible from anywhere. The part that was challenging with the implementation of this tool is that when you click on a link, it will only open on Internet Explorer and not Google Chrome. I actually have one colleague who had heard of this tool before. We worked together to try and find a way, either in the settings of Symbaloo or the computer settings, in order to have Symbaloo open the link in Google Chrome. But unfortunately, we weren't able to find a way. All of the applications open on Internet Explorer. This causes a problem for some of the games our students engage in because they will only work on Google Chrome. Therefore, it is not as effective as we would like it to be. Some of my colleagues have used this tool as a way to store the game and then copy the link into a flip chart, bookmark it on student computers, or create a shortcut under the student as files. My team shared that this is a great teacher tool so that they can store resources that we think are helpful for students to use. This is especially helpful for when students delete links from the student shared folder. Many of my colleagues have shared this frustration about how they have lost all of their links, especially links they have had for years. They were very excited to have this resource, especially with the fact that they can search for already created Symbaloos and add it to their list of Symbaloos. They mentioned that this will allow them to have more access to technology in their classroom because of the ease of searching for reading and math centers that other educators already use. With new Chromebooks coming our way, I can see Symbaloo becoming a great part of our classroom environment by both teachers and students. This is something I would also like to share with parents during back to school night. I feel as though this could be a place where parents can access resources for their children. I can foresee us creating an account which can be used strictly for home use. I think this will help during winter break and spring break, especially for our not yet achieving students. After my presentation on Doing, many of my colleagues stated they were excited about the idea, but due to the limited amount of iPads we have, this became a bit challenging. Another aspect that was challenging was that this was a two-piece component. Not only did they have to learn how to use the green screen application, but then my colleagues had to learn how to piece the video together in YouTube. This added an extra step to the process. Another aspect that made the use of this application challenging was picking images that would have enough space for students to interact with. As time went on, my colleagues asked for support with finding simple ways to incorporate this tool into their reading block. This made me excited because I was able to provide suggestions on how this tool could be used to create short videos. Out of all the presentations I completed, I found the green screen to be one of the tools that was the least effective for my colleagues. I think they thought the idea was great, but the work that it entailed is too much. In order for this to work, there needed to be plenty of room to set up the green screen sheet. This was a challenge for many. My colleagues were able to foresee this challenge as they tried to make their own videos after my presentation. Many could see that they would have to adjust furniture in their classroom in order to make this work. In my model, the green screen sheet was held up by my Promethean board. My colleagues found that to be a great place to set it up, but again, they would have to adjust their classroom layout. After my presentation on YouTube, my colleagues seemed more reluctant to incorporate this tool to make a cohesive video. There was constant confusion about where to click and how to upload the video, even with the PowerPoint presentation. This part of the process required a lot of one-on-one support. Many of my colleagues found this process to be a bit frustrating and time-consuming, as it is not as user-friendly as some of the other web tools they have previously learned. Some of my colleagues found this process a little time-consuming, but not as difficult as they thought after trying it on their own. Some of my colleagues needed further assistance as they were trying to find and upload videos. I think my presentation would have been more effective if I had gone through the process together as I was presenting the information. I was torn between initially practicing together because I know I have different types of learners and I didn't want to prejudge my colleagues. I also sympathized with my colleagues because I remember the first time I learned how to make a video on YouTube. I felt very frustrated and reluctant to use it. It wasn't until I had some time to take the information in, process everything, and then come back to it that I found it to be much easier. For my presentation on Storybird, I was very excited because for this presentation, all of my colleagues were present including our special education teacher as well as our ESOL team support. This allowed everyone to create an account, and I could help those who needed support right then and there. I also thought it was great that I had already implemented this with my class because I could speak firsthand about how excited students get when using this tool. I was also able to share some of the stories that my students had already created, which in return allowed my colleagues to see that it is a tool well worth implementing. Everyone is excited about using this tool with their classes. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to not only share this resource with the first grade team, but also with our supporting staff. The ESOL teacher and SPED teacher were excited to learn about Storybird. One of the best features that I shared with my colleagues was that we can assign projects to students. My colleagues really enjoyed that once the stories are complete, students can read each other's stories, and these stories can also be shared with parents. My colleagues found this to be exciting and rewarding for both students and parents. We have made a plan to share the resource with parents next year during back to school night so that they can be aware of all the great tools their children are using in school. After introducing Plickers, my colleagues discussed that it would be easier to create one account for all of the teachers to share. This allows all of us to share questions as well as create our own classes within the account. This also allows us to differentiate or edit questions based on our class's needs. Having one account allows one person to be responsible for setting up the questions, and the rest of the team can add the questions they would like to their class. My colleagues were very excited about the use of Plickers, especially when we assigned each teammate a partner to work with. This helped my colleagues feel supported and willing to try to use Plickers. I also offered my assistance to some groups as they would be in charge of creating the questions on different weeks. Using Plickers as a team was a bit challenging because even though everyone would be exposed to using Plickers at some point, not everyone was going to use it initially. I foresee many of my colleagues forgetting how to create questions. In order to support my colleagues, I placed my PowerPoint presentation under my Google Drive folder, which contains all of my other presentations as well. I can also foresee that some of my colleagues would be willing to use this application at first, but as we switch our subject planning and the year comes to an end, I can see many forgetting how to add questions. I think I will suggest us creating questions during our math planning period. Therefore, it can be something that is constantly being used and kept up to date. At the beginning of the year, I sent out an email to my colleagues explaining that I was going to be in my room for one-on-one support with any questions they had. This was not as successful as I thought it would be. The reason I took this approach was because through my survey, I realized that only half of my colleagues stated they wanted one-on-one support. As time went on, I realized I needed to change my approach and started to speak with my colleagues personally about setting up a specific